Thank you for rejoining me here for the top 5 Warhammer audiobooks, as per my opinion. Of course, it is only my opinion, so you may well disagree. If you do, if you think there's something missing from the list, or perhaps just in a different order, please do let me know. I'd be happy to hear your thoughts. But let's get straight into it. Number 5, brought to you by the 8th Legion Night Lords.
We have come for you.
In at number 5, we have the Soul Hunter series, consisting of a trilogy of books, Soul Hunter, Blood Reaver, and Void Stalker. Written by Aaron Dembski-Bowden, author of over 40K and Horus Heresy titles, and narrated by Andrew Wincott. This is a dark and serious series prying into the post-heresy happenings of one of the least documented fallen legions. The Night Lords, shattered by their own ambition and poisoned by the corruption from their homeworld Nostromo, were in a perilous position following the failed siege of Terra. The subsequent death of their Primarch, despite his acceptance of it, struck a grievous blow to what remained of the cohesion of the 8th Legion, dividing them into the remaining companies that were loyal to the ideals of Curse, and to those that simply wished to see the Empire burn and follow their own ambition for power. This series closely follows Talos Valkyran, Sergeant of 1st Claw, 10th Company, and one of the few remaining apothecaries in the Night Lord's Legion. Talos inherited his gene sire's gift for foresight, manifesting itself randomly and hurling Talos into a debilitating fugue state. Despite the weaknesses posed by his gift, it represents a great power, a power coveted greatly by both the leader of his warband, the Exalted, formerly known as Vandred, and also the leader of the Black Legion, Abaddon the Despoiler. Talos was given the affectation Soul Hunter by his gene sire Curse, having foreseen that Talos would disobey his order to allow the assassin that would come to kill Curse to leave unharmed. Talos was unwilling and unable to do so, and instead hunted down the assassin to exact his own revenge. The series also presents a look at the menial workforce aboard a Chaos Legion vessel in the churning tides of the Eye. Septimus, personal attendant and artificer to Talos himself, and by extension to 1st Claw, provides a secondary protagonist viewpoint. Though a heretic himself, we do still see the vestiges of humanity in such individuals, in stark contrast to the unrelenting horror of the legionaries that rule the dominion of the Covenant of Blood. We get a great deal of lore, specifically about the Night Lords, but also about other Chaos warbands in the Eye at this time, such as the Red Corsairs and the Black Legion. Given that it's deep and dark and doesn't really have any comic relief, I can't really recommend this for people entirely new to these audiobooks. But if you have heard a few titles before, you're familiar with the setting, it's not going to be as hard for you to follow, and it's definitely worth a mention here, securing the number 5 spot. Number 4 is brought to you by the Hedonites of Slaanesh. In at number 4, we've got the Fabius Bile series, most notably Primogenitor, Clone Lord, and Manflayer, but also lesser titles such as Repairer of Ruin. These are written by Josh Reynolds and voiced by John Banks. Fabius Bile was born to the noble houses of Terra, Albia, if I remember correctly, and was inducted into the 3rd Legion Emperor's Children by his birthright, through his house's acceptance of unity. Bile avoided the calamity of his legion, a cancerous mutation affecting many of the legionaries, through his direct access to the genetic samples and his work to try and reverse or eliminate the genetic taint. The mutation could not be corrected and saw a great many of his legionary brothers killed as a result. This series documents Bile's genetic mastery long after the Horus Heresy. It's unclear exactly how long had passed due to the nature of the war. His schemes are unparalleled, and his biological and chemical mastery are only rivaled by the Dark Eldar, Bile having left to work amongst the Dark Eldar in Camorra before setting out to attend to his own agenda. We get a great depth of lore about the Warp, Chaos generally, as well as the Dark Eldar and even the Eldar Harlequins, as well as key members of the Fallen Legions. This series is somewhat harder to follow than others because it spends the majority of the time following the story in the war. As a whole, I love Fabius Bile as a character, and I think Josh Reynolds has done a fantastic job bringing the character to life. It's definitely worth your time and easily secures the number 4 spot here. Number 3 is brought to us by the aid of Caiaphas Kane himself, Ferric Jurgen. I'm sorry, sir. In at number 3, we have the Caiaphas Kane series. Included in this series are For the Emperor, Caves of Ice, Traitor's Hand, Death or Glory, and Duty Calls. These books are written by Sandy Mitchell, writer of over 20 books in this setting, and voiced by Stephen Perry, Penelope Rawlins, Emma Gregory, and James Spooner. This series is narrated from the perspective of Caiaphas Kane himself primarily, with additional annotations and supplementary sources provided by Inquisitor Amberly Vale. Vale presents the life and history of Caiaphas Kane as an anthology in inquisitorial record. Vale makes an appearance at several points in the series herself, having stood out to Kane and his great passion for beautiful and often incredibly dangerous women. This series presents the most comically focused books in this top 5, with laughs frequently throughout. Kane's self-deprecation, combined with the dry and sometimes even snide commentary from Vale, conveys the gravitas of the situation without the tumult of characterization and setting that you find in some other books. Kane distinguishes himself from his peers, inadvertently in most cases, by placing himself in harm's way to avoid a certain and likely horrific death. We see behind the curtain of his heroic exterior, as does Vale. However, this fails to take away from the often selfless result of his actions. This is a pleasant twist on the typical underdog story. Kane sees himself for what he is, or perhaps lesser than, yet his perception of those around him is insightful and often quite witty. His account focuses on his own interpretation of events, meaning we can't take this lore as facts, rather an entertaining illustration of the events as experienced by him. I feel the Caiaphas Kane series is a great introduction to this setting. You don't really need any backstory or understanding to really get into the character because it focuses so specifically on him. You only really need to understand him, and this series does that for you. As it happens, I'm actually currently on the 4th of these books, so I haven't finished them myself, but I have heard the first 3 several times and really did enjoy them. As a whole, I would recommend this to anybody. Whether you're new to the setting or you're a veteran of countless titles, I would recommend this to you. Number 2 is brought to us by the Black Legion.
From shame and shadow recast, in black and gold reborn.
In at number 2, we have the Black Legion Trilogy. Of course, the 3rd book in the series is not yet out, but the first 2 are, starting with the first in the series, Talon of Horus, and then the Black Legion, giving the series its name. The series is written by the famed Aaron Dembski Bowden, writer of over 40 titles in the Horus Heresy and 40k universe, and voiced by Jonathan Keeble, famed for his voice acting in TV, films, books, and games that we'll have all come to enjoy, I'm sure. This series is narrated from the viewpoint of Iskandar Kaon. Having handed himself over to the Imperial Inquisition, and subsequently having been mutilated and confined, Kaon recants his saga, starting in the Eye of Terror, as to how the Black Legion came to be, and the role he played in its inception. Though the most prominent character featured in the book is Ezekiel Abaddon himself, it's very clear that the protagonist here is Iskandar Kaon. Like the majority of the books in this setting, it's told from his perspective. Even without considering the effect the war would have on one's perspective, the events described are woven from the experiences of Iskandar Kaon, not Abaddon the Despoiler. Iskandar is a fallen son of Magnus, a former Thousand Sons legionary. Kaon is an Astartes of obscene psychic power. Following their retreat to the Eye after the failed Siege of Terror, many of the psychically gifted Chaos Legionaries found themselves cut out into a niche for assassination and sabotage, owing to their ability to achieve their objective or kill their target without the need to enter hand-to-hand combat against their fellow dangerous brother legionaries. I wouldn't want to spoil his methods and the rituals that are engaged in, because they form some of my favourite parts of the series, and ultimately my favourite parts of any of the books I've listened to whatsoever. We get lore from many of the champions of the Fallen Legions, who go on to become members or rivals to the Black Legion, as well as insight into the infrastructure present within the Eye, with both the Dark Mechanicum and the Legionaries having cannibalized all that they can to further their own power and dominion. We get insight into the fortification and industry present, and more importantly, the tools and tactics that these mighty warriors use to bring down their rivals and claim new territory and resources for themselves. If you're a fan of Chaos, I don't think you can ask for any more than what's conveyed in this series. It gives you a heck of a lot of lore about the Eye and the characters there within that we wouldn't otherwise get from other books. I wouldn't recommend this to somebody who's brand new to the setting, unless you know you're really interested in the Chaos lore and that you're willing to sort of take a moment to revisit something just to fully grasp it so that you can understand the later parts of the series. Fantastic series, and I personally cannot wait to snap up the 3rd book in this series when it comes out. I will very likely just drop whatever I'm currently on and just go straight on to that. I enjoyed this series that much. And finally, number 1 is brought to you by the Ordo Malleus. The penalty for non-compliance is death. The Emperor Protects. In at number 1, we have the Eisenhower Trilogy, including the 4th in the series, Magos, to a lesser extent. The series is written by Dan Abnett, again an acclaimed writer with over 40 titles within Horus Heresy and 40k settings, and voiced by Toby Longworth, again an acclaimed voice actor of films, books, TV and games, and personally my favourite voice actor. I did mention this when we played Machine for Pigs, I just absolutely love his voice. He really does have a voice that you'd follow into battle willingly, and simultaneously feel like you're being rubbed down with warm honey. This series has spawned several other trilogies regarding the characters that follow Eisenhower as part of his entourage, namely Bequin and Ravenna. The Eisenhower Trilogy covers everything you could possibly want in terms of action. You got void combat, aerial combat, hand-to-hand combat. You've got Xenos, you've got Chaos, you've got mutants, you've got psychers of every flavour. There really isn't anything that this book misses on in terms of the setting. The protagonist, Gregor Eisenhower, has a rich and thoroughly thought out backstory and lives a life that would be incomprehensible to any other citizen of the Imperium. As an Inquisitor, he wields the power of the Emperor to break down the obstacles that he can't otherwise overcome with his not inconsiderable guile and intellect. His position grants him the authority to command any individual or any body loyal to the Imperium, and grants him the tools required to bend any system or vessel to his wishes. And we all know that with great power comes a boatload of lore and a load of juicy details. The main theme I take away from this series is the duality of such power. Gregor's humanity is central to his character, but throughout the series we see this shift under the strain of his mission to defend the Imperium from the forces that would seek to bring it down from within and without. Under the ever-increasing pressure of planetary and system-wide attack, most would lose their minds. I suppose it's a matter of personal interpretation as to whether you feel that does occur for Gregor himself, but he rises to the challenge nonetheless. I would recommend this to those new to the setting and veterans alike. You really don't need too much background understanding to really get into the series, because again, the characterization of Gregor is so complete, and really that is sufficient to understand the events described in the books. But I wouldn't want to spoil any of that for you whatsoever. Every new chapter brings a revelation and something for you to really get your teeth into, and I really just couldn't stop listening to this. Thank you so much for joining me here for my top 5 Warhammer 40k audiobooks. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, this is just my opinion. Let me know in the comments what you think. I'd be really interested to hear if there's something different you'd have put in there, whether you might have just changed the order, or whether altogether you'd have removed these and picked a new top 5 yourself. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time in the Underhive.